ground, noun, see also, grind, surface of earth, run, often, the ground, uncountable, the solid surface of the earth. I found her lying on the ground. He lost his balance and fell to the ground. 2 meters above, below ground. Most of the monkey's food is found at ground level. Ground forces, soldiers that fight on land, not in the air or at sea. Houses and a luxury tourist hotel were burned to the ground, completely destroyed, so that there is nothing left. Soil. 2. Uncountable. Soil on the surface of the earth. Fertile ground for planting crops. Area of land. 3. Uncountable. An area of open land. The kids were playing on waste ground behind the school. 4. Countable. Often in compounds. An area of land that is used for a particular purpose, activity, or sport. A football, recreation, sports, etc. Ground. Ancient burial grounds. See also, breeding ground, dumping ground, parade ground, stamping ground, testing ground. 5. Grounds, plural, a large area of land or sea that is used for a particular purpose. Fishing grounds, feeding grounds for birds. Gardens. 6. Grounds, plural, the land or gardens around a large building. The hospital grounds. The house has extensive grounds. Area of knowledge, idea. 7. Uncountable, an area of interest, knowledge, or ideas. He managed to cover a lot of ground in a short talk. We had to go over the same ground, talk about the same things again, in class the next day. You are on dangerous ground, talking about ideas that are likely to offend somebody or make people angry if you criticize his family. I thought I was on safe ground, talking about a suitable subject, discussing music with her. He was back on familiar ground, dealing with the customers. They are fighting the conservative on their own ground. See also, common ground, middle ground. Good reason. 8. Countable, usually plural. Ground, for something, for doing something. A good or true reason for saying, doing, or believing something. You have no grounds for complaint. What were his grounds for wanting a divorce? The case was dismissed on the grounds that there was not enough evidence. He retired from the job on health grounds. Employers cannot discriminate on grounds of age. Enriqued. 9. Grounds, plural. The small pieces of solid matter in a liquid that have fallen to the bottom. Coffee grounds. Electrical wire. 10. North American English, British English. Earth. Countable, usually singular. A wire that connects an electric circuit with the ground and makes it safe. Background. 11. Countable, a background that the design is painted or printed on. pink roses on a white ground. Extra examples. Both parties in the debate shared some common ground. Both relationships hit rocky ground. Drunkenness at work was sufficient grounds for instant dismissal. Each time, he seemed to be losing the argument. He just shifted his ground. He knew he was on dangerous ground talking about money. He resigned from his post on the grounds of ill health. He resigned on the grounds of ill health. He sat down on the ground. He stood on the hallowed ground of Yankee Stadium. Her architectural designs have broken new ground. Her eyes searched the ground. Her feet don't reach the ground when she sits down. His evasiveness gave grounds for suspicion. His evasiveness gave grounds for the suspicion that he knew more than he was saying. His plan is too costly to ever get off the ground. I apologize if I'm going over old ground. I was angry with his blatant attempt to take the moral high ground. I was on more familiar ground now that we were talking about our own system. I'll meet you at the football ground. Legally, we are on very shaky ground. Many estate workers lived in cottages in the grounds of the castle. Permission to open a mine was denied on environmental grounds. Poverty is a breeding ground for terrorism. Several researchers have published articles covering this ground. She held her ground in the debate. She lived in the grounds of the castle. The atmosphere inside the ground was electric. The constable had reasonable grounds for arresting her. The doctor's office is on the grounds of the hospital. The estuary is a breeding ground for birds and marine life. The fall of the old regime provided fertile ground for opportunism. The helicopter burst into flames when it hit the ground. The horse pawed the ground impatiently. The palace is set in extensive grounds. The plane was so overloaded it couldn't leave the ground. The river has become a dumping ground for industrial waste. The roots may spread as far below ground as does the foliage above ground. The town stands on high ground and is not prone to flooding. The tunnel goes deep under the ground. The window is just above ground level. Thunder shook the ground. We found a patch of open ground in the middle of the woods. We just seem to be going over the same ground that we covered last year. A hole in the ground. A search for middle ground between the two sides. All the graves in the burial ground. The broken branches which littered the ground. Ground horses were deployed in the area. He lost his balance and fell to the ground. I found her lying on the ground. It was buried 3 meters below ground. Most of the animal's food is found at ground level. The car got stuck in the muddy ground. The council is spending £30,000 on new equipment for the recreation ground. The ground fell away to the left of the road. The kids were playing on waste ground near the school. The local people seem to use the woods as a dumping ground for all their household waste. The plant grows to about 2 feet above ground. The rocket crashed a few seconds after it left the ground. The rope barely reached the ground below. There was a small patch of ground at the sight of the cottage. They drove across miles of rough, stony ground. They are building a new football ground in the town. We visited the site of an ancient burial ground.